Hello and welcome to Frost Over the World. Later in the programme, the latest from the Florida primary in the US, Egypt, 1 year on, and a look at the worrying events in Nigeria. But we begin with the global economy. This week, the world's leaders and policymakers convened in Davos. The focus of their meeting this year, how to develop a new world model. As the Eurozone plunges into deeper crisis, with a Greek default almost inevitable now, we ask, what next for Europe and the global economy? Joining me to discuss the many facets and possible outcomes is Mohamed El Erian, CEO of PIMCO, the world's largest bond trader, with over $1.35 trillion of assets to play with. And if you want to know what $1.35 trillion looks like, it looks like this. There it is. Mohamed El Erian joins us now. Mohamed, George Soros said this week at Davos, the World Economic Forum, that, quote, the euro must survive because the alternative would cause a meltdown that Europe and the world can't afford. Do you think that's true, or are governments causing really more damage by trying to preserve the euro in what may be an archaic form?
Well, he's absolutely right in saying that if the euro does not survive, then this is terrible news not only for Europe, but for virtually every country in the world. So if Europe ends up fragmenting, we would expect a global depression. Now, the second part is the must.
Yeah.
The must involves some notion of things have to be done to stop Europe from fragmenting. The image, Sir David, that we have is the Europeans haven't been kicking the can down the road. They have been rolling a snowball down a hill. When you roll a snowball down a hill, two things happen. It gets bigger and bigger, and Europe's problems have gotten larger and larger over the last 2 years. And secondly, it's very difficult to control a snowball coming down the hill. And the Europeans have found it very difficult to control. So this is Europe's moment of truth. They need to step up to the plate. They need to take some very difficult decisions. And if they do, they can save the euro. But there's nothing automatic about it.
Right. And what's the most difficult decision they've got to take first?
Well, the first one, they've got to recognize that they are a dysfunctional family and that certain members of the family may need to take what I call a sabbatical. So if you look at Greece, for example, it is very difficult for Greece to restore growth and jobs within the Eurozone. Greece most likely will have to both default and exit the Eurozone. And that's a really difficult decision. The second difficult decision they need to do is contain the collateral damage. And that means making really hard decisions about the banks and forcing the banks to recapitalize and forcing the banks to improve the quality of the assets. And finally, they need to strengthen the core. They need to recognize that if they want to maintain the Eurozone for a number of years, they do need a fiscal compact, but they also need a growth compact. So this is a multifaceted issue, Sir David, and they need to move simultaneously on several fronts.
If, in fact, Greece, for instance, does leave the Eurozone and starts to undertake some of the things you're mentioning, is it conceivable that a country like Greece could return to the euro, or once you've gone, you've gone?
Oh, it's absolutely conceivable they could return, and in fact, they should aim to return on a stronger basis, which means a growing economy and one that is solvent. The Greeks have to realize that exiting the Eurozone is not the end of the world. In fact, you could argue that after an immediate disruption, and unfortunately, when you are in the mess that Europe is in now, there is no first best. Every approach in Europe has costs. But after an immediate disruption, Greece can get back on its feet and could join the Eurozone. But if they stay in it now, they're going to find it very difficult to maintain social peace, and they're going to find it very difficult to deliver on growth and jobs.
And if in this situation we ever reached a situation where there was a collapse of the euro, in that situation, have you been able to pre-plan the situation in such a way that you could still make money, make a profit out of the collapse of the Eurozone?
Well, first, as I said earlier, a collapse of the Eurozone would be really ugly.
Yeah.
Because there are so many unpredictable elements to it. The one thing that's predictable about the collapse of the Eurozone is how unpredictable the implications would be. Why? Because of the network effects. Because you have a system that has been built on the assumption that it is durable. So if that system collapses, the collateral damage and the unintended consequences would be enormous. Having said that, there are certain things that everybody should go through. First, scenario analyses. While we don't know exactly what it would look like, you can have a range of scenarios and ask the question, what mistake can you afford to make? Yeah. Second, be cautious, be prudent. Everybody hopes that Europe can get its act together, but there is a probability, it's not the baseline, but there's a probability that they may not. And therefore, prudence right now makes total sense. Finally, as we discovered in Lehman in September, when Lehman Brothers went down, when the global economy got what we call a sudden stop, a heart attack, what's critical is not only how you prepare in the run-up to a shock, it's what you do the next few days. And what's critical is to have what we call Plan B, Plan C, and Plan D. So talk about what you could do after the event. This is all scenario planning. You hope that you never need it, but I think all of us have an obligation to think the unthinkable, because the last 2 years have been absolutely full of unthinkables.
Yes, and talking of the last 2 years and so on, we had the US financial crisis, and 2011 gave us the Eurozone crisis. Do we have to legislate for the fact that we're likely to see, because this seems to be the pattern, that within the next couple of years there will be another major crisis? Is that likely?
Well, the next couple of years, we have to navigate some major changes, and we have to do it intelligently. The first one is that the West will continue to delever. You know, Sir David, we in the West fell in love with this great age. Great not in the sense it was wonderful, but great in the sense it went too far. Too much debt, too much leverage, and too much credit entitlement. People felt entitled to buy things on credit. Now the system has to delever, and that's a reality. It's a multi-year reality. The second reality is that the world has changed. We have some emerging economies that are on a wonderful breakout phase that is pulling millions of people out of poverty, but the global economy as a whole has to accommodate that change. And thirdly, we need to update our institutions. We've had terrible failures in governance, in compensation procedures, in representation procedures. So we have three major challenges. They are going to be with us for a number of years, and the world as a whole and every country is going to be challenged to navigate this. And therefore, the chances of something going wrong are not de minimis. Okay, you have to worry about the possibility of something going wrong. This is a big challenge that the world faces over the next few years.
And what about the situation? I've been reading various commentators, not all commentators, but a number of US commentators who are saying that they're seeing signs of recovery in the United States economy. Is that a recovery that is sustainable, or is that likely to be a false dawn?
So the good news, as you say, Sir David, is we're seeing signs of recovery. We see it in the housing market. We see it in the jobs numbers. The U.S. economy is healing. So I don't think there's a question as to whether the U.S. economy is healing. The question is the U.S. economy healing fast enough given the viruses that are out there? If you like, it's like a patient having come out of ICU. They are healing. They're not yet out of the hospital, but you don't really want to expose them to any new viruses. And our sense is that the U.S. is indeed healing, but not healing fast enough. So that if, God forbid, something terrible were to happen to Europe, then the US would find itself again talking about the possibility of a renewed recession. And that would be terrible news because unemployment is very high. 45% of the unemployed are now long-term unemployed. Youth unemployment is up to 23%. So the last thing the US needs right now, and the last thing the world needs right now, is a recession in America.
And in fact, what effect could the election have on that? I mean, could the two parties hammering at each other on the economy and so on, could that have a negative or a positive effect on what you're just talking about, the potential recovery?
Yes, it could. You know, the US is different from Europe. Europe has both an engineering problem and a political problem. The US doesn't have an engineering problem. The solutions to the US economic problems can be designed, and designed with a higher level of assurances. The problem with the US is the dysfunctionality on the political side, the inability to come together and move forward. You know, not only are the Republicans and the Democrats far away from each other today, but the social movements that have emerged are pulling them further away. So the Tea Party pulls the Republicans further to the right, and the Occupy movement pulls the Democrat further to the left. What the US needs today is what we call the Sputnik moment, a recognition that society as a whole has to come together with a common purpose and a common vision. Most people think that this will not happen until after the November elections.
What about China? I mean, have they overinvested? Everybody's commented on the fact of the massive stimulus in 2009 and 2010. Is there a danger of a bubble bursting in terms of China? Or is the communist system going to help them? Or are they just too big to have that problem? They could have that problem.
So they absolutely could. We are very lucky in the rest of the world that China did indeed stimulate its economy, because China has been acting like one of the growth locomotives. And we haven't had all that many growth locomotives, so thank God for China. And you see this every day in terms of the earnings of American companies and European companies. China is a very important market for them. Now, China does have issues, there's no doubt about it. China has bubbles in the real estate sector. China has non-performing loans among its bank, and China has a shadow banking system. But there's two important offsetting factors in China. One is it is a very well-run economy in the sense that they have direct controls where they're able to change course much easier than the West can. Second, China has accumulated tremendous reserves, so they can take losses without being pulled offside, if you like. So yes, China has challenges, but in terms of the ability and willingness to deal with that, we're pretty confident that they're going to be able to do so without a hard landing.
Let's turn for a moment to your homeland, Mohamed, if we may. Hailing, as we know, from Egypt, do you feel at the moment that the excitements of the early days of the Arab Spring are dissipating, and that at the moment we've got a situation now where the revolution is not so much in progress with benefit to the citizens of Egypt and so on, that it's at a crucial stage, but it's not clear where it's going to go? Do you feel worried by what you were originally thrilled to see?
I've called recently the Egyptian revolution, which is an incredibly impressive event. I mean, when you think that in 18 days, a grassroots movement without any clear leadership was able to overcome over 30 years of iron fist rule, that's a pretty impressive accomplishment a year ago. Today, the revolution is incomplete and impatient. Now, I've looked back and I realize, and I think people are realizing increasingly, revolutions are not discrete events, they are processes. The first stage of a revolution is an uprising. Egypt has had that. The second stage is displacing a regime. Egypt has had that. And then critically, revolutions have to pivot from the past to the future. It's a hard pivot. It's a hard pivot because at that point, you have to be less of a freedom fighter and more of a nation builder. And that is the pivot that Egypt is facing today. So it is not surprising to me that there's a sense of impatience and imperfection. When I look at the ability of the Egyptians to reclaim their country, when I look at the sense of ownership that individual Egyptians have in their country and their revolution, I'm confident that they will complete the revolution. I'm confident that we will get there. It's not going to be a linear process. It's going to be a bumpy process, but I'm pretty comfortable that it will happen and that Egypt will complete its revolution.
Thank you very much for your words today. It's been a real delight, and here's to the next time.
Thank you very much, Sir David.
Next, politics. In fact, American politics. In the United States, the race for the Republican nomination for the presidential candidate now appears to be a straight fight between Mitt Romney, who's long headed the polls, and the former House Speaker Newt Gingrich, who won convincingly in the South Carolina primary last week. Next up is Florida. And it's there we turn to speak to one of America's top pollsters and a Republican strategist and a man of the moment. Here he is, Frank Luntz, who joins us from Jacksonville in Florida. Frank, it's great to see you again. Great to have you with us. The campaign's underway. In the words of the old phrase, what do you think of it so far?
Well, I've never expected to go this long. I did not expect it to become this vicious. And quite frankly, it has become the entertainment for millions of Americans. You've got the former governor of Massachusetts, Mitt Romney, who's now taken off the gloves. The former speaker, Newt Gingrich, where the gloves were never even put on. And you got two other candidates that occasionally throw the jabs. This is better than boxing, wrestling, and the Ultimate Fighting Championship combined.
And how are the two front-runners looking at the moment? The two front-runners on the Republican side, obviously. How do you analyze their appeal so far, each of them?
Well, right now, Mitt Romney is the front-runner nationwide, but only by a few points. This is his second go-around, and he's clearly showing the experience of having been through this once before. He's also much more stable. You never laugh, you never cry, you don't get angry with him. He's consistent in his performance, and he's specifically focusing about creating jobs. His primary opponent, his main opponent, is Newt Gingrich, the former speaker, which many people in your audience will recognize because he's been around for so long. His presentation is so much more emotional, so much more powerful, but you never know whether you're going to be turned on by it or turned off by it. And in fact, David, just moments ago, Speaker Gingrich went ballistic about the Romney campaign, and the anger between the two candidates is now palpable. You can see it when they stand next to each other. You can see it between their supporters. It's getting really ugly out there.
And there, what Newt Gingrich has done and come out more strongly about what he feels. I mean, how do people, if you were advising candidates, is it a mistake to get angry like that? Or is it refreshing, tough, good politics?
Is perfect question. You get angry on behalf of America. You get angry on behalf of the voters. You don't get angry on behalf of yourself, because voters then see it as being sanctimonious and righteously indignant. Romney's approach, where he saves those most negative responses to his television advertising, and by the way, David, you can't swing a dead cat and not see an anti-Newt Gingrich ad here in Florida. Romney's smart by putting all that negativity on television so he can remain more positive in his public presentations. And
what about their politics and how much it appeals? I mean, Newt Gingrich, everyone would say, is more of a traditional conservative, very, very much a conservative and so on. I mean, who appeals to the public and what they want at the moment? I mean, the more conservative approach of Newt Gingrich, the more measured approach of Mitt Romney?
And frankly, it's split. The upper middle class appears to like Mitt Romney's approach better, more businesslike. The working class seems to like Newt Gingrich's approach better, a bit more of a brawler. They are inspired by Gingrich's debate performances. They appreciate Mitt Romney's business experience. So it really depends where you are, who you are, and what presentation it's being given in. That's why it's a dead heat. You can't call Florida. They're within 2% in every survey. I don't know who wins.
And you have a situation, too, in terms of money. The figures that Mitt Romney earned last year, $27 million in the past 2 years and so on. That sounds huge and so on in one sense. And yet, on the other hand, Newt Gingrich has plenty of money too. So is the money factor important, or does it wipe each side of the ledger out?
No, it actually is important. I understand that God occasionally takes loans from Mitt Romney. It's the issue of campaign money. Mitt Romney has 10 times as much money that Newt Gingrich has, and Romney's prepared to spend it on a lot of television advertising. It makes me miss those ads for McDonald's, Big Macs, because instead of being able to watch ads for food, I'm now watching ads by Mitt Romney against Newt Gingrich.
Right, and that's not as exciting. Do you think it'll go all the way?
Well, I mean, you can take a... no, I don't think it goes all the way. By the way, I was going to say that you can tell that I like ads for food if you want to get a wider shot of this here. No, David, I don't think that it goes all the way. I think Romney does have the advantage because he has so much more campaign cash. But there's one thing clear, because I know viewers are looking already towards the fall. Both of these candidates are weaker today than they were 30 days ago, and that makes Barack Obama slightly more likely to be reelected than he was 30 days ago.
Well, that's the other half of the thing, isn't it? Yes, that Barack Obama looks stronger than a few weeks ago. Maybe it's because of the warring going on the other side and so on. But I mean, he's a good campaigner, Barack Obama, isn't he?
He's an amazing campaigner. He reads a teleprompter better than most Hollywood celebrities. When I look at these Republicans reading teleprompters, Stevie Wonder reads a teleprompter better than some of these Republicans. And Obama, he loves the audience. He loves the chance to speechify. The question for Americans, it's a simple question, David. Are you better off today than you were 3 years ago? If that becomes the focal point of this debate, of this campaign season, then Barack Obama loses. But if the question then becomes, do you think you'll be better off a year from now than today, then just maybe Barack Obama wins.
So at the moment it is too close to call. It's probably too close to call between the two Republicans, and it probably is definitely too close to call at the moment between the president and his opponent.
That's how I look at it, but that's why this becomes so entertaining. Some people can't wait for the Academy Awards. Other people can't wait for the American Super Bowl. I can't wait for this election season to be over because I need sleep.
Well, we all need sleep in our lives, but maybe we'll take it easy for the next few months and watch what happens. And we'll talk again to you and find out as your fantastic diet works and you get slimmer and slimmer, we'll talk to you through the next few months. Frank, it's a joy to have you with us.
Thank you, Sir David.
Frank Luntz there. In a minute, 1 year on from the Egyptian uprising, is there more to come? What's next after this short break?